I'm Dr. Robert LeFevre, aka Dr. Bob. I've been part of Community Hospice since the very beginning, which means at least 40 years. As my capacity as original medical director and then medical director for many years, member of the board of directors. At that time, you could be on the board and an employee. At that time, it was volunteer employee. And I was first chairman of the board of directors at Community Hospice. My original involvement came because, for a couple of reasons. One was, first of all, I knew Kathy and her husband Daryl. They lived 2 or 3 blocks away. Some of our kids went to Camp Jack Hazard together and that sort of thing. My wife at that time, Robin, knew Kathy and Daryl and family. And I remember distinctly, I think it was either Kathy or Mary Jean sent out a questionnaire to the docs in the community as to whether we should even have a hospice. And as I recall, I took the questionnaire and put it in the round file, of which Robin said, "No, Kathy's a good friend of mine. You have to fill this out." So I filled it out. Well, shortly thereafter, Robin died unexpectedly. And interestingly enough, Kathy had just gotten back from a hospice conference in Montreal. And there was a very prominent hospice physician at that time who also happened to be a urologist. I think that's all just coincidental. But in any case, Kathy was really instrumental in me getting through the loss. And so as a memorial to Robin, we set up a fund for the establishment of hospice in Modesto. And I didn't think much about it after that. But subsequently, within a few months, it turned out that no physician would volunteer to be medical director. And of course, they didn't really want somebody who just experienced a loss. That didn't seem appropriate. However, it was also, from my perspective, appropriate to honor Robin, and I ended up accepting the position. None of us really knew anything about hospice. And I remember distinctly our first education was, we had Dr. Bill Lammers come down to the MJC, and we're in this big auditorium, and there's 20 of us or so, and he's giving us Hospice 101, 2-hour crash course, at the end of which he said, "Well, good luck." And off he went back to Marin, and we're sitting there saying, "Okay, what do we do next?" So next is 40 years later. And here we are talking about the 40th anniversary and how the organization has grown. Early on, it was really on a shoestring. The first office was the second floor of a church that's 14th and L Street here in Modesto. We were there for a couple of years. I remember that because when we had board meetings, I would sit up on one of the tables as chairman, and then everybody else would sit in the chairs, which, by the way, were metal chairs, and we didn't have a lot of heating, and it was winter, and it was really cold. And so the board meetings went fairly quickly. Our next location was actually the basement of the building on Griswold and McHenry. And there were some other rooms, but that's where we held a lot of the work got done. And then subsequently to the building that's just north of the canal, still on McHenry, it's now Boyette Petroleum Building, and we were there and gradually took over the whole building. It was a great facility, except that it had a really leaky roof, and there was always issues. And then obviously now we're in a wonderful facility here. But things were on a shoestring, and Mary Jean and I would joke that our first high-tech telephone system was 2 tin cans and a string, and she would beg, borrow, and steal pencils and whatever we needed. And ultimately, we realized that we had to have some funds come in and be able to pay full-time people, and you couldn't rely on just a volunteer, all volunteer organization. And in that time frame, the Gallos were very supportive. And occasionally, in order to make payroll, a personal check was written to the organization to help us fund paying staff. My role went from 2, 3, 4 hours a week at the patient care conference mainly, to maybe 10 hours volunteer a week, and then I still had my full-time urology practice at the Gould Medical Group, and then it became more intensive until I finally, I can't tell you what year because I can't remember, but became full-time medical director as the organization grew, and there was more to get done. But it is just incredible to know that community hospice has come from literally a shoestring, living hour to hour, day to day, not knowing whether we could pay anybody, to a very robust organization, the importance of endowments, the importance of fundraising. I remember on the board, and I stayed on the board many years, even not as a voting member, but as a seat for the medical director, but having discussions, should we have a hope chest? I mean, we take hope chest for granted, but not initially. Another big discussion we had was, should we accept Medicare? There's a lot of government restrictions. Well, if we hadn't accepted Medicare, we would have gone under, years ago. So those were big discussions. There were big discussions on. I was still involved when we built the hospice house, and my wife Mary and I made numerous trips. We went to Seattle to visit hospices. I'm from Cleveland originally. The Hospice of Western Reserve in Cleveland is fabulous. And went there and spent a lot of time, took a lot of pictures, went to Florida, visited some hospices there, and kind of brought back all this information and tried to coalesce it to create what I think is really a magnificent building and facility that we now have in Houston. Well, some people may wonder why hospice is important, both in general as well as to our community as a whole. And there's a number of reasons, but it's so important to treat the whole person and the whole family. And there's no other organization that's capable of doing that. And they're capable of doing that in many, many settings. Even in a nursing home. It's a whole added level of care that your loved one gets by having the hospice team in. The other thing is that there are areas of the community that are underserved. And there's if people can't pay, there's no insurance or whatever, it's not an issue. They still qualify. But I personally have, along with the nursing team, taken care of patients in the county jail, under the bridge, homeless, in motels where you barely can get in the door because of the trash and the dirt. And we go everywhere, take care of anybody's needs that qualifies. So it's community support from that standpoint, but from an individual family standpoint, oftentimes I hear, well, we're not ready. Well, sometimes you can't fight that, but if we can get the physicians more involved to help facilitate, to say, why don't you have a hospice consult? Let one of the nurses come out, one of the social workers come out, talk to you and see and explain to you what we can do. And of course, once you're under the hospice umbrella, not only are the services phenomenal, but then you've got a year's bereavement follow-up counseling to help through the grief process. So, 1,000% supporter of hospice. Obviously, I wouldn't have been involved for 40 years, but it's just amazing. The hospice movement throughout the United States and the world, but in this community specifically, we're #1 rated, and it's just an honor to, looking back, to somehow have been involved at the beginning, and luckily still involved. I'm Dr. Robert LeFevre. I support Community Hospice, and happy 40th anniversary.